The United States military is facing its worst recruitment numbers since the end of the Vietnam War, and it's causing major national security problems. Army recruiters were roughly 50% behind their goals this year. That would reduce their numbers by 40,000 troops over the next 2 years, which would be like losing 4 whole divisions on the battlefield. Where'd Bravo Company go? We need covering fire now. What do you mean they didn't re-enlist? The American military is on its way to falling dangerously below the necessary troop strength of 1.3 million. This force number isn't random. It's carefully created based on the ambitious US foreign policy goals of defending its borders, upholding international order, as well as promoting American interests abroad. Our current strategy is based around us being a superpower in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia Pacific. We've sized our military to be able to fight more than one conflict at a time in those regions. The Air Force is 4,000 recruits behind their goal, and the Pentagon is an overall 15% behind. All of this calls into question whether or not an all-volunteer force is still sustainable today. The strange thing is, the problem isn't unique just to the United States. Canada and the UK are also significantly missing their force strength numbers. Canada is 7,600 members short, and the UK is likely to shrink down to 72,000 soldiers by 2025, which is 10,000 below goal. Some UK infantry regiments are reported to be understaffed by 30%.
If something isn't done to reverse these numbers soon, the current reduced force is going to be stretched to its absolute limit.
Other NATO allies like Turkey rely on mandatory service to fix this problem, with 32% of their ranks being conscripts, something that US politicians and military leaders strongly oppose.
Let's take a look at 4 key explanations for why nobody wants to join the military, including financial problems, declining trust in the military, woke culture, and unqualified citizens.
Reason number 1, a tight labor market could help explain why no one is joining. The US unemployment rate is at 3.5%, around the lowest it's been in the better part of a decade, meaning recruiters have a smaller pool of recruits to draw from if everyone already has better paying, easier civilian jobs readily available. For instance, an E1 private in the Army earns $22,000. An average high school graduate earns $40,000 per year. But this doesn't really fully explain the decline in recruitment because, contrary to popular belief, when comparably measured, the US entry-level military pay is about 8% higher than US entry-level civilian pay. This is because the military covers healthcare, housing, and oftentimes food.
Uniform paid for, electric bill paid for, water bill paid for, living quarters paid for.
Famous performer Mia Khalifa had some insight into the financial problems facing the military recruitment.
Honestly, I think that selling your body, like if we're going by that definition, being in the Army is worse than being on OnlyFans.
Wow.
You're selling your body to the government.
I didn't just sell my body to the government, I also sold my soul. But you know what? She might not even be wrong. If you're gonna make sacrifices necessary to serve your country, maybe you should earn a pretty penny for it. But don't worry, the military always has been known for being hip and non-traditional. They leveraged TikTok to solve the problem.
An Army recruiter used Cameo to pay the Island Boys to help with his recruiting goals.
Army recruiter giving out bonuses, paid vacations, and a free college, no money. Hey, invite me right now, Sergeant Thomas. I want to be in the Army.
Army recruiters have since been banned from using TikTok to recruit further, which has kneecapped their abilities to forge relationships in a world that has changed, where impressing students at a mall in your Class A uniform is becoming more and more rare. People are going out less. In response, Army recruiters have more than doubled their quick ship bonuses, where recruits can earn $50,000 if they start training in the next 30 days for some jobs. So why hasn't this helped boost recruitment numbers? Young people reportedly fear PTSD is a major factor as to why they won't join.
A concern that might be well-founded, with 20% of service members returning from Iraq and Afghanistan showing signs of PTSD.
As much as military leadership would like to blame the tight labor market, this article from the Wall Street Journal points out it doesn't really explain the problem fully. The unemployment rate today is actually roughly the same as it was in 2019, when the Army exceeded its recruiting goal. So the obvious question becomes, what major event happened between 2019 and today that might have affected recruiting numbers? Reason number 2, trust in the military. The 2021 Reagan National Defense Survey found there was a decline in American confidence in the military, stating, quote, "With all that has happened in the last year, it's understandable that Americans are experiencing a sense of pessimism. Public trust in the US military has dropped from 70% in 2018 prior to the pandemic to today a lowly 56%.
Then Governor Kate Brown activating the National Guard as part of the unified command
A riot declared earlier tonight during protests in downtown Portland.
More than 62,000 U.S. National Guard were mobilized to help prevent rioting that happened across the country during 2020. According to the National Guard Bureau, troops in 23 states were activated by governors to try to stamp down and quell the level of disorder. While I personally believe that this was a necessary measure, I could see where many young Americans could look at that today and lose trust in the armed forces.
On the other hand, the military potentially earned a lot of people's respect for helping keep the peace.
However, it's important to keep those numbers in context, because while trust has declined in the military, they still remain one of the most highly regarded among American institutions, with only 6% of people saying they have no trust in the armed forces at all. For comparison, Congress is sitting at a lowly 10%, and public education system at a 21%. As a product of public school systems, yeah, that tracks.
It's unfortunate, it's wrong, but this next quote shows how a lot of people distrust the military.
I'm joining the Marines in the USA. What do you think? I think you're a fool. You're a fool. Stupid. You ain't protecting nothing but profits for companies that don't care about you. They'll force you to take injections, which you don't even want.
And while I think a lot of what he says is performance and trolling, if that is truly what people think about patriotism and service in the US military today, then there must be some kind of way to fix this messaging problem. There must be some kind of advertising campaign that the military could run that wouldn't alienate half the country. As part of the Pentagon's reported $1.6 billion in recruitment spending each year, the Army released a new advertising campaign called The Calling in 2021. Let's put it this way, not everyone loved it. Critics said the recruitment campaigns were quote-unquote woke virtue signaling instead of an effective campaign to fill the ranks. Veterans believe that these commercials focused on aspects of new recruits that make them different and individual and special unique snowflakes, which specifically runs counter to the military's traditional culture of unity and selfless service. In reaction, the Army disabled comments on the video to ensure no one could express themselves on the video about expressing yourself. But this is part of a much broader problem in the entire NATO force.
Potential reason number 3 for low recruitment: woke military culture?
The Canadian government earmarked 200 million CAD to completely change their military's entire culture. Would this mean a shift of focus from winning wars to policing feelings and telling on fellow soldiers for minor speech infractions? The Canadian Minister of Defense, Anita Anand, claims the changes will address long-standing, deeply ingrained prejudice present in their forces. Canadian troop strength is currently 20% understaffed meanwhile. On February 2nd, 2022, while Russia was preparing to invade Ukraine, the British Army was ordered by Chief of the General Staff, General Sir Mark Carlington-Smith, to stop training for a day to reflect on inclusivity. Whether the US, UK, or Canadian forces truly need to change their culture or not, the steps that are taken in order to achieve those changes are sometimes strange. The advertising in the United States was likely well-intentioned. It was meant to shatter negative perceptions of the Army about how it isn't accepting of certain groups of people. And to be fair, the US Army has only allowed certain orientations to openly serve for 10 years out of the past 225 years that the institution has existed.
So on paper, creating an ad that explains that everyone is welcome in the Army doesn't sound like that bad of an idea.
Whether or not the advertising succeeded in that regard is up for debate, but it did fail on its purpose of boosting recruiting numbers.
Evidence that media has a huge impact on recruiting numbers comes straight from the Navy's 500% boosted numbers from Top Gun.
Joining the military is about becoming a part of a uniform team. It's about putting what makes you unique and special aside in service of a common goal. It's like my old drill sergeant used to say, I dislike all of you equally. The problem with these commercials isn't that it's about woke theory. It's the fact that they fail to explain what the common values of the Western world are. It failed to outline the very real threats to our freedoms. If the enemies of the Western world had their way, the rights of marginalized groups would greatly suffer, and that is a fact that I think both sides can get behind. But none of this really matters if the next generation aren't qualified to join the services in the first place.
Reason number 4, unqualified citizens.
According to the Department of Defense, approximately 70 to 75% of young Americans today are not even qualified to serve right off the bat due to being either overweight or having minor criminal infractions that come up on their background checks. Only 23% of candidates remain who don't require a waiver to join. That number is further reduced by more potential recruits being unable to pass the Army's academic exam called the infamous ASVAB. It's kind of like the SAT. The pool gets shrunk even further down to an above ground pool when you consider another 12% are going to college. I know a lot of times I joke about having gotten an ASVAB waiver, but that's not true. I cheated on the test. If US forces shrink by an additional 40,000 troops, there are some who believe we'd be reaching a breaking point for low troop numbers. Current members would have to pick up the slack, which would mean added stress, longer deployments and mobilizations, and an increased likelihood of accidents and mistakes that could lead to more conflict. There are a number of solutions to turn the problem around for recruiting. More schools could adopt JROTC programs to help reach new candidates. Currently, only 10% of schools have these kinds of programs. Better messaging targeted to reach the country's youth, explaining why we need their skills in order to protect against the threats of enemies around the world who oppose their stated values of equity and inclusion. The military is faced with a difficult choice. They can lower standards and deal with unqualified recruits who are more likely to wash out within a few years, or they can increase the workload on the existing reduced force. Lieutenant General Thomas Spears said, quote, "2022 is the year we question the sustainability of an all-volunteer force. I think the recruitment problem is the canary in the coal mine, warning of underlying problems in the Western countries that need to be addressed, and not only for national security purposes."